Okay. Moving on to the next slide, slide number 5. These are questions which are relevant to the interview rounds. So I think of the interview rounds as technical questions, and I think of the interview rounds to be broken up into 4 or 5 major headers. So let's try and address the first main header. I think one of the most important criteria or one of the most important aspects of interviewing for private equity firms is mastery over the financial toolkit. And I think understanding of accounting is extremely important. What do I mean by accounting? I mean you need to absolutely be a master of understanding the relationship between the 3 financial statements, your income statement, balance sheet, and statement of cash flows. I understand that the audience today are mainly an MBA, post-MBA level students, and even if you were at a pre-MBA level students, at a minimum you needed to know to enter a private equity as a private equity analyst. You would need to have mastery over the financial statements. Financial ratios especially are something which are usually always asked. I know I was asked in my interview as well, especially things like ROA, return on assets, return on equity, things like the net income margins, the EBITDA margins, quick ratios are something that are almost always asked, and the importance of these are something that are always asked in one way or the other. Something that I would stress is the DuPont analysis. For those who are not aware of the DuPont analysis, it is basically breaking up of the return on equity into 3 or sometimes 5 of its components to be able to strip out the components of whether or not the equity, the return on equity is being determined through the profit margin, whether it's coming from the asset turnover or it's been coming from the leverage. So one could derive its return on equity from either of the 3, and various companies are able to get their returns from either of the 3, and each of these come with their pros and cons. And this is a classical question in private equity interviews. To be able to compare companies who are able to generate returns on equity through one of the 3 levers. And I think this is a classical example that one should have mastery over to be able to differentiate on where they are getting the returns on equity. So definitely have this as one of among your checkpoints. Checklist is the DuPont analysis. One of the classical examples that one would need to address is understanding leverage and the capital structure. Classical example is understanding the pros and cons of leverage. Most people believe leverage is a bad thing. Yes, leverage is a bad thing. Clearly, given over the last 3 years, we all know how bad what leverage can do. It gets a lot of people underwater. But for most private equity firms, leverage especially is not such a bad thing because it's one of the ways of how a lot of private equity firms actually generate returns. So it is always great to know of how private equity firms are able to actually take leverage and generate returns. LBO, is a term which many of you might be familiar with or must be curious, is something. Leverage buyouts is something that private equity firms often use, to buy out companies, get control, and actually generate returns for their LPs. So that is one thing that you need to keep in mind, the pros and cons of leverage. One common question is, how do you compare, the risk profile? What is the metric that you would use to compare the risk profile of 2 companies which would be servicing debt? Always remember that the service coverage ratio, which is defined as the operating profit over the interest expense, or EBIT over interest expense, is one of the ratios that you would use to compare the risk profile of, or rather the the debt risk profile of two companies. So these are some of, I mean, there are various ways to be able to measure risk, but these are the debt risk, but this is one of the example, one of the metric that you could use to be able to measure this. So these are some of the questions that I've kept at the bottom of the slide. One classical example that that I would want you to think of. Some of you who would have gone through the CFA curriculum would remember, or through the MBA curriculum. When you think of the IRRs, you would think of the internal rate of return to be a single number. But go back after this webinar and read up a little bit about it. This is a trick question asked in a lot of PE interviews, if there can be multiple IRRs. Actually, there can be multiple IRRs, and it actually depends on the curve. It depends on on what kind of a depends on what kind of a polynomial that the equation is. At the end of the day, the IRR is basically a solution which returns is a solution of a root. It's basically a solution which gives you returns a particular root, and depending on how the polynomial is, it could give you multiple roots, and therefore it could give you multiple solutions. So that's sometimes a trick question used in a lot of PE firms to test how strong your financial concepts are. So if you are a post-MBA level student, I just wanted to give you a sense of how deep an interview could go into testing your financial concepts, because private equity expects you to go one level deeper into your financial concepts.